point 1 of the Treaty on the European Union as regards the situation in Poland. I would like to inform you that there will be no catch the eye procedure and no blue cards will be accepted. So we will now proceed with Vice President Timmermans again on behalf of the Commission. Vice President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much once again, Mr. President. Thank you to the Parliament for putting this issue on the agenda. The Commission's concerns raised in our 3 previous recommendations of July, December 2016 and July 2017 have not been addressed. And you know of the steps we've taken on the 20th of December 2017. On the 21st of December, the Polish President signed 2 new laws on the Supreme Court and on the National Council for the Judiciary into law, raising additional grave concerns on the consequences for the independence of the Polish judiciary. In a nutshell, within a period of only 2 years, 13 laws were adopted in Poland. The cumulative effect is to limit the independence of the judiciary and the separation of powers. The entire structure of the justice system is affected. In particular, the Constitutional Tribunal, the Supreme Court, ordinary courts, the National Council for the Judiciary. The executive and legislative powers can now interfere with the composition, the powers, the administration and the functioning of judicial authorities in a way that, in our view, undermines judicial independence and the separation of powers. And if you undermine judicial independence and the separation of powers, there is a clear risk of a serious breach of the rule of law. These concerns are fully shared by a wide range of European and international organisations, including the European networks of the presidents of the constitutional courts, the Supreme Courts and the highest administrative courts. A particular informative read, also as regards the historical context, are the Council of Europe's Venice Commission opinions of December 2017. In light of these developments, the Commission adopted on the 20th of December last year a reasoned proposal for the Council in accordance with Article 7(1) of the Treaty. Simultaneously, the Commission adopted also a 4th recommendation under its rule of law framework, in which we invited the Polish authorities to solve the problems identified in that recommendation within 3 months. The Commission also decided to refer Poland to the Court of Justice of the European Union for breaches of EU law by the law on ordinary courts. The recommendation sets out clearly a list of steps that the Polish authorities can take in order to remedy the current situation. In particular, the Commission believes that the Polish authorities should address 5 key concerns, and they could do it as follows. First, by publishing and implementing the 3 unpublished 2016 judgments of the Constitutional Tribunal. Under the rule of law, no government should be able to decide which court rulings are published, especially if publishing is essential for these rulings to be valid. Secondly, by restoring the independence and legitimacy of the Constitutional Tribunal, by ensuring that its judges, its president and its vice president are lawfully elected and appointed. The changes over the past 2 years have led to a complete recomposition of the tribunal outside the normal constitutional process, so that it is no longer able to provide effective constitutional review of laws. By amending the law on the Supreme Court so as to not apply a lowered retirement age to the current Supreme Court judges and to the current First President, thereby avoiding that almost 40% of its current judges will be forced into early retirement. That's the 3rd option that should be used. Also, the discretionary powers of the President of the Republic over those judges who wish to stay or should be removed, and as well the truly extraordinary so-called extraordinary appeal procedure that allows to reopen and overturn judgments going back 20 years, not on grounds of new facts, but on grounds of social justice. This is unheard of in any member state of the European Union. Fourthly, by amending the law on the ordinary courts so as to remove the new retirement regime for judges of ordinary courts, including the discretionary power of the Minister of Justice to prolong mandates of judges that wish to stay. Also, the arbitrary and unjustified decisions to dismiss court presidents should be remedied. Fifth point, by amending the law on the National Council for the Judiciary to ensure that the mandates of current judges members of the Council are not prematurely terminated, and to ensure that judges members are elected by other judges and not by politicians. I am pleased to inform you that since January this year, since the new government, exchanges between the Commission and the Polish authorities have been taking place again. And for the first time in those 2 years, we really have a dialogue. And I think we should continue this at all levels. We met with the Prime Minister, with the Foreign Minister, and also Jean-Claude Juncker met with the Prime Minister, Vera Jourova also met the Foreign Minister, so we intensify these contacts. I really hope that this dialogue will lead to concrete measures addressing adequately these 5 key issues before the end of March. Because the dialogue, however pleasant and intensive, is only useful if it produces results. So I'm really looking forward to Poland's concrete reactions to our recommendation. I cannot overstate the importance of the rule of law for the functioning of the European Union. Respect for the rule of law is not only a prerequisite for the protection of all the fundamental values listed in Article 2, it is also a prerequisite for upholding all rights and obligations deriving from the treaties and for establishing mutual trust of citizens, businesses and national authorities in the legal systems of all other member states. The proper functioning of the rule of law is also essential, in particular, for the seamless operation of the internal market and an investment-friendly environment. Let me also draw your attention to the European Court of Justice's ruling of yesterday in case C46-16. The ECJ has clarified the scope of Article 2 and Article 19 in relation to the need to ensure at national level an independent and effective judiciary. You can be assured that we will examine this judgment very carefully as a basis of our dialogue with the Polish authorities. I would like to underline that the Commission does not question the right of any member state to reform its judicial system. It is up to member states to define and reform their judicial system. However, whatever the model chosen or reform carried out, full judicial independence should be safeguarded in line with EU law and European standards. You cannot use the argument of needing to reform the judicial system to then introduce political oversight or political control by the executive or the legislative force of the judiciary, which should remain independent. The discussion today and the whole process we are engaged in since 2 years is not against Poland, and I'm really a bit saddened by the fact that every time this is presented as a one-man operation against Poland or the Polish nation, we have a difference of opinion, very strong difference of opinion, with this Polish government, not with the Polish nation. The Commission is working for a union with Poland and for Poland within the union. I cannot, and I repeat this, I've said this before in this Parliament, I cannot imagine a European Union without Poland. We need Poland, and I think Poland also needs the European Union. The independence of Poland's judicial system and respect of the rule of law are essential cornerstones of a strong Poland in the European Union, of an independent Poland, a sovereign Poland. There is no contradiction between being a full-fledged and active member of the European Union and being a sovereign nation. It's about time that people who sell this nonsense would be called out. To conclude, the Commission has always stressed that upholding the rule of law is a joint responsibility of all EU institutions. That is why I'm so glad your Parliament takes the time to look at this so intensively again today. We are now in a new interinstitutional phase which reflects this joint responsibility, and I have to report to you that yesterday the Commission got very strong support from an overwhelming majority of member states in the Council, very vocal, very strong, and urging both parties, the Polish government and the Commission, to continue the dialogue and to come with concrete solutions to the problem, and we are game. The European Commission wants that to happen. And I trust that this Parliament will continue to show its strong determination to uphold the rule of law in all of our member states, including Poland. That is in our collective interest. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice President. We will now proceed with the speakers for the political groups. First, for the EPP, for 6 minutes, Madam Metsola. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by saying how upsetting it is to me, to my group, and to my colleagues that we stand here today again in the shadow of Article 7 discussing Poland, the land where solidarity was born in all its senses. Solidarity that fought for freedom and independence and inspired so many in Europe to do the same. But we cannot close our eyes to what is happening, not on our watch. We remain seriously concerned with what is going on in Poland, and I cannot but express our sincere regret with the lack of will from the side of the Polish government to even engage in a real constructive dialogue with the European Commission, let alone contemplate the changes that are needed. So we are here for the 6th time on this issue, and we are here not because we want to be, not because we want to somehow punish Poland. We are here because someone must stand up for the people of Poland. We are here because the authorities in Poland have shown little signs of moving. Rather than work to improve the circumstances and start to rebuild the bridges they have burnt, the situation has deteriorated even further. And we have seen countless heads and deputy heads of lower courts fired, often by means of a fax. We have seen the reform of the National Council for the Judiciary get underway in a manner that, even with so many Polish judges resisting, serves to undermine the independence of the judiciary. We have seen Poland regress. Now, democracy and the rule of law in Poland today are being seriously threatened, and this cannot continue. Polish people are looking to us to act, and act we must. The Polish government is even going as far as attempting to control historical narratives as a means towards somehow bolstering its own nationalistic aims. Now, Europe can simply not afford to close its eyes to what is happening. And so tomorrow's vote will mean that we support fully the Commission's decision to trigger Article 7 for Poland. It did not need to come to this, but unfortunately the Polish government left us with little choice. Our intention, and we are going to do everything in our means for Poland to come back to the heart of Europe. The Commission has always made it clear, as we've just heard, that they are willing and are ready to talk, but we need concrete results from Poland. We need to see respect for Poland's constitution and the independence of its courts. No one wants to push Poland away. We have been trying to do exactly the opposite. But being an EU member state means respecting EU values, honouring your commitment to fundamental rights, and understanding that an electoral majority does not give you a free hand to do as you please. It means respecting critical voices. And if you are a member of the European Union, you cannot ignore what it stands for. And that's why we will always stand up for the people of Poland, the land that gave Europe and the world the values of St. John Paul II, the genius of Marie Skłodowska-Curie, the music of Chopin, the courage of Lech Walesa, and so much more. Polish heroes are European heroes, and we are one. So I repeat, it is not only about Poland. We know that if the rule of law is allowed to collapse anywhere, then it has failed everywhere. This is the very nature of our union, and we as a European People's Party cannot allow it. Now, we also know that there is a huge gap between the rights we demand as EU citizens and the mechanisms that are available to ensure their protection. It is something that we must address. And the situation we see in Poland has again underlined the need for a concrete mechanism that would protect the rule of law, democracy and fundamental rights across the European Union. Now, our message to Poland is clear. Do not turn your backs on Europe. Do not drive a wedge where one does not exist. Let's all come back, as we've just heard, to the negotiating table, engage in active dialogue and act on the Commission's recommendations so that the current situation can be remedied as soon as possible. And I conclude with this message: we will not, we will never turn our backs on the people of Poland. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Metsola.
Thank you, Mrs. Metsola. Now for 2 minutes, Mr. Weidenholzer.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner. It is more than 2 years ago that our House started to debate the situation of the rule of law in Poland. Things were difficult and serious, but still solvable then. In the meantime, we can observe a dramatic deterioration, whereas the position of the European institutions did not alter and our concerns remained. The Polish government continued its activities. Dialogue did not happen for months, although Vice President Timmermans was constantly urging cooperation. There is now a new situation. Language has softened, but substance remains. As we all know, the triggering of the Article 7 procedure taken by the European Commission was not something done lightly. The activation of Article 7 is a last resort. We know this, and we know that action has only been taken as the situation is serious. The Polish people deserve a free and fair judicial system. No citizen should ever feel that their judges could be under political influence. No Polish person must ever doubt that they can receive a fair and free trial. There are also other issues I have to address. 3 months ago, we passed a resolution criticizing attacks on civil society organizations and threat of the sexual and reproductive rights of women, and we are also concerned on the repression of some groups as retired public servants. But today we are focusing on the matter of the judiciary. To make it clear, triggering Article 7 in the case of Poland is not directed against the people of Poland. It is a last signal, and it is against the government who neglects systematically European concerns. Concerns which are not developed by so-called Brussels bureaucrats. There is a clear fundament in the treaties and an obligation. A government who does not accept this is telling lies to its people. You may win elections, but you put the future at risk. We stand fully behind the Commission in its triggering of the Article 7.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Weiden.
Thank you, Mr. Weidenholzer. Now for 7 minutes, Mr. Legutko.
Panie Przewodniczący, Szanowni
President, ladies and gentlemen, the resolution makes no sense, I have to say. This repeated criticism of Poland over the last 2 years makes no sense either. And the problem is that the majority of you have no idea of what is actually going on in Poland. You don't know what these forms consist of and why they are being implemented. Vice President Timmermans has been dealing with Poland for a long time, but I nonetheless see, Commissioner, that you are not well informed. I will try to set out for you the wider context here. I don't want to get into a polemical discussion. We've already had that in the past. After the fall of communism in Poland, we started to build a new system of justice, a new judiciary, and we concluded that it would be best for the judiciary to be controlled by the bodies of the legal professions, and they were given extended competences and powers, wider powers than those which exist in any other European member state. And many lawyers acted in an abominable way under communist times and should have been removed from any position of power a very long time ago. Somebody said recently that the legal profession would purge itself, but that didn't happen. And in the courts we see judges who handed down decisions persecuting people during communist times. And that proposal, the powers that were granted to bodies of the legal profession was an idealist view. We thought that the legal system would establish the right balance, but we were mistaken, because within the legal system, which had complete control of the judiciary in Poland, you still had a lot of people from the old regime. And that system was characterized by corruption, by clientelism, and anyone who opposed this suffered. Let me just give you an example. The presidents of the court could decide for themselves on the composition of certain magistratures. Before a trial decided, we already knew what the result of the trial was going to be. There were a huge number of judges, and trials were among the longest in Europe, and Poland was in fact one of the countries that lost the most cases before the European Court of Justice, and all of this was an indication of the fact that the legal system, the justice system, was not working properly. And these judges were extremely proud of their status. They didn't make any secret of their political loyalties, and this had an effect on actual judicial decisions and on the judgments handed down by the courts. And it was not in any way in line with the principle of independence of judges who should be subject only to the law. In fact, what was happening was that judges were acting with complete freedom, and they took action against anyone who opposed them. There are many cases that we know of. Someone called a judge informing him that with some information about someone who worked very closely for our Prime Minister at the time, Mr. Tusk, and was paid as a result of that. And so there were many cases when laws were flouted, and indeed the Polish constitution. Decisions were taken behind closed doors among a small circle of friends and confidants of the President of the Constitutional Court or of the Supreme Court. The judges could almost say, "I am the law." I mean, it was a very serious situation. There was a very close relationship between the body of judges and the political world. And this affected the Constitutional Court and effectively ended the independence of the Constitutional Court. So it was monstrous from the point of view of rule of law. And while all of this was happening, there was no reaction from you. When we called on you to stem this process, you reacted with indignation. It was a small circle of friends that were governing the justice system, and double standards were applied everywhere in the courts with impunity. Now, what is happening now in Poland is a reform of the justice system, which is coming 20 years late. The system that we had previously didn't work properly because it hadn't been well designed and well structured. So is it the case that previously we had rule of law and now we are changing the situation? Well, no. Anyone who says that is wrong. What we want to do is correct the situation. And of the solutions that we want to adopt now, none of these solutions are things which are absent in other European countries. They are solutions and which have proved their worth elsewhere. So sometimes you get people very surprised to hear what is being said about Poland. They say that this doesn't correspond at all to what is happening in our country. and you are perceived by the Poles as defenders of the old regime, a regime that everyone is thoroughly tired of in Poland, a regime which will never make a comeback because it was completely compromised, and you should never defend it because it is indefensible.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Legutko.
Thank you, Mr. Legutko. Now for 2 minutes, Ms. in 't Veld.
Yes, thank you, Chair. After all this, first of all, I would like to echo the wonderful statement made by Roberta Metsola, every word of it. The ALDE Group very much welcomes the decision by the European Commission to trigger Article 7.1 in the case of Poland. And since the last time we've discussed this, unfortunately, further worrying developments have taken place, like the controversial Holocaust law and the new initiatives, again, on a full ban on abortion. And it escapes me how these measures are solving the problems that you are mentioning, Mr. Legutko. Now, we call on the Council as well to act swiftly, because with every day that passes, democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights are damaged further, so no further delays. Because this is about the moral authority of the European Union in the world. People are watching us and asking themselves, will the EU rise in defence of its own values? The Commission has set a deadline on March 28th, but in the meantime I would like to know what the consequences are for police and justice cooperation if the Polish judiciary cannot be considered to be independent, because Member States' authorities must work together on the basis of the presumption of compliance and not the pretence of compliance. Now, all Member States have to be treated equally, and yes, we're criticising Poland, but applying double standards is undermining the credibility of the European community of values. And in this respect, dear colleague Weber, I would really like to ask you why you are highly critical of Poland, but you're still protecting Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban, the man of the dirty anti-Semitic, anti-Soros, anti-Brussels and anti-migrants campaigns. I think the EPP has to choose where it stands. Finally, it is high time we get a neutral, objective mechanism for upholding the values of the European Union. This House has put forward a legislative initiative in 2016. We urge the European Commission to present their announced proposal for such a mechanism as soon as possible and not wait until the end of the year. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin in 't Veld.
Thank you, Ms. in 't Veld. And now for 1 minute, Ms. Spinelli.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. Some will say that activating Article 7 is nothing more than a statement given that at the end of the day there will not be unanimity in the Council. I don't hold that view myself. Although we recognise the risk of our being powerless, Parliament must speak out if it finds that there are serious violations of Article 2 in any of the Member States. Václav Havel, a dissident from Eastern Europe, showed that there is a power of the powerless. And that's the power that we have to wield so that we can put not only the Polish government but any other government tempted to undermine the rule of law on guard, including the government in Hungary. Governments do not hold a monopoly of legitimacy. They share it with the judiciary, which is the final guarantee of people's rights, regardless of election results. In a democracy, no laws can impose a single vision of national history. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you, Ms. Spinelli. And now for 2 minutes, Ms. Keller.
There were many times in history where Poland was actually the forerunner for the rule of law in Europe. Poland was the first country in our continent with a modern constitution which actually established an independent judiciary. Poland has also a long and proud tradition of civil movements for freedom and democracy, from the resistance against the German occupation to the Solidarność movement. Unfortunately, the Polish government, however, does not seem to remember the proud traditions of Poland, and it certainly does not seem to care about the future for the country. It takes Poland away from the path of democracy and civil rights. It sees opposition and debate not as a sign of a living society, but as a threat. But Poland is much more than the Polish government. And we as European Parliament, as European Union, we need to support those. We need to support the judges who fight against their demission. We need to fight for the people protesting against the destruction of the last primary forest in Europe. And we need to support the women fighting for their rights over their own bodies. And to support them means to keep up the dialogue, to support cross-border initiatives, and to be strict and strong with the government when it comes to rights and rules. Because when your own government doesn't want to live up to the most basic standards, what do people do? They turn to Europe. And that's why we support the Commission's proposal to trigger Article 7. And if the Council doesn't do its job on Poland ASAP, then it should expect a full investigation into the Polish case by the Parliament, as we have promised last November. And let's remember, the people of Europe expect us to stand up for standards and rights that define us as Europeans. This is a great responsibility that we carry, not just towards Poland, but to all citizens of the European Union. They have the right to be governed well, to an independent judiciary, to see their rights well guarded, and this is something that we need to upkeep. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. The next speaker, Mr. Farage, 2 minutes.
New values. I'm always hearing about human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and yet in 2011, when journalists in Poland were being apprehended, held and sacked for being critical of the government, what did the European Commission do? Nothing. Why? Well, of course, because Mr. Tusk, as Prime Minister, was pro the European Union. But when you get law and justice in power, who are critical of the European Union, just because they try to clear out the communist old guard and modernise their system, here you are on the verge of invoking Article 7 and taking away their democratic rights within the Union. And of course it's the same story in Hungary, where Viktor Orban, quite rightly, refuses to accept your ludicrous migrant quota programme, and he is now cast as the devil. Perhaps the real reason is that he's taking on Soros, perhaps the most dangerous man in Western democracy today. Keep going, Viktor Orban, is all that Free Democrats can say. And you're happy to interfere in every single member state where you think you see an infringement, apart from, oh, I'd nearly forgotten, Catalonia. 950 people get beaten up by the police because they want to turn out on a Sunday morning and express an opinion, a totally clear violation, Mr. Timmermans, of people's human rights, an absolute abuse of any sense of a democratic process, and yet you say in that case it's none of our business. But of course, they're a pro-EU government, so the iron fist of the European Union is reserved purely for your critics. You said today you hoped that the United Kingdom would change its mind and reverse Brexit. Well, looking at the way you're treating Poland, I would have thought the answer must be a very big no. This, for Poland, is the modern-day Brezhnev doctrine of limited sovereignty. You rebelled against that system. I hope you go on, Polish people, and rebel against this one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. For now, two minutes for Mr. Żółtek.
Nie będę polskiego rządu chwalił ani ganił.
Thank you. I'm not going to praise the Polish government or criticise it either. You could do both. What I want to talk about today is freedom. Freedom that Poland could be robbed of by a group of officials. And this doesn't apply just to Poland. This small group of officials have decided that as they earn huge amounts of money, they can govern over those who've been democratically elected. If you, as members elected by your various nations, allow this handful of officials to win in their dealings with Poland, they won't leave it there. They'll come along and dominate your countries too. So instead of governing in the name of your democratic, of your peoples, you are just going to be doing the bidding of civil servants. whose power will be greatly bolstered once they've become commissioners. Certain MEPs here are in perfect agreement with that handful of civil servants, so they will vote just as they ask them to. Most of us disagree. We're not going to allow ourselves to be bought just to get re-elected or because of party loyalty.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Żółtek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Żółtek. Mr. Korwin-Mikke, 1 minute now.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący. Pan Frans Timmermans ma absolutną rację, mówiąc o...
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, Mr. Timmermans is right to point out that the rule of law in Poland is in danger. That's why I'm leaving, because I'm going back to Poland to fight against the PIS dictatorship. But really, you're hindering me in this struggle. You don't know the situation in Poland. Any coercive measure against the government only increases their popularity, and it's thanks to you, actually, that all of this is happening. It is you who are undermining democracy in Poland. But I mean, really, you know, sometimes I wonder what you're doing, whether Adolf Hitler isn't here sometimes. I mean, you're adopting that kind of power. The situation is not but down to people like you, Mr. Timmermans. It's you we must fight against, and I think the European Union should be destroyed.
Herr Kollege Korwin-Mikke, ich rufe Sie zur Ordnung.
Mr. Korwin-Mikke, that was an unparliamentary comparison. I call you to order. That concludes the speakers list, and so I'll give the floor to Mr. Timmermans for the European Commission.
Mr. President, we have made clear why we believe Article 7(1) was warranted. We're also in a dialogue with the Polish government to try and resolve the issue. The Commission is very much committed to that. And the interesting thing is, from the beginning of this process, I was warned, don't do it. You'll bring about Polexit. Don't do it. The Polish people will no longer support the Union. Well, as a matter of fact, support for the EU in Poland has gone up, not down. It's gone up. So do the Polish people understand that Mr. Farage, who speaks out in support of their government, is someone who wants to break up the European Union? Do the Polish people understand who will be the biggest victim of a broken up European Union, given its geographic position? Poland. Do the Polish people understand that Mr. Farage's best friend is Vladimir Putin? Oh. Do the Polish people know that? Do the Polish people know that in Mr. Farage's view, in Mr. Farage's view, yes, yes. When somebody says something you don't like, you just try to prevent them to say it, don't you?
And you know
you admire Vladimir Vladimirovich.
You must be very scared, Commissioner. That's all I can say.
I'm not. Well, you know. Yes, I'm shaking in my boots because I'm next to you.
You must.
Yes. But what I want to say is this. The European Union cannot survive without Poland in its midst. Poland has a strategic interest in being members of the European Union. Polish people will not be fooled by anyone. They know this. They know this. And you know, at some point, you know, there's only so much, to quote a young American, there's only so much BS people will take. And let me be very clear on this. I respect Mr. Farage's idea of leaving the European Union. I respect that. But I also want those who he now addresses as their friends to understand what his agenda is. And I'm quite sure that should not be Poland's agenda. And I would urge the Polish government to see where their true friends are. And that's not with those who want to break up the European Union.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Timmermans. To conclude this debate, there were 3 motions for a resolution B119 from 2018 from the Libe Committee, B21 from 28 from the ECR, B121 from the ENF group. The debate is now closed. The vote will take place tomorrow. The next item on our agenda will be a statement by the Vice President of the Commission, the High Representative, concerning the EU priorities for the UN Human Rights Council sessions for 2018. On behalf of the Vice President of the Commission, the High Representative of the Union